Hi, everybody. This is Bob Ost, and this is Theater Resources Unlimited. It's our Friday community gathering. I think it's the 120th consecutive week that we've been doing these. We started them April 17th, 2020. Um, there was something called COVID, everybody, right? You know about that. You've heard about that, right? And we all went into shutdown, and I didn't know what to do to keep my company running. Actually, there were moments where I thought I was going to close True. I just didn't know what I could possibly do to keep going. But somebody told me about Zoom, something I didn't want to know about, but they told me anyway. And I was hearing from a lot of you. We were emailing a lot of you in the room, and other friends of mine from True, and everybody was talking about how depressed they were about being in isolation. This thing called shutdown, which we all were sure was only going to be 3 or 4 weeks, but how horrible to be in shutdown for 4 weeks. It was just more than we could bear. Of course, it turned out to be a lot more than 4 weeks. And I realized that I had a Zoom account. So I just said, hey, guys, you want to get together in Zoom on a Friday and maybe talk about what you're doing and maybe meet and be a community? And I got a lot of yeses. And a lot of people are here with me today who have been with me since April 17th, and I've got a lot of new friends in the room too. Uh, so we're going to keep doing this. Now that we're entering the live performance world, I'm still going to do these Friday community gatherings because, as you who are in the room already know, we've got people here from Australia and from other coasts like the West Coast and all over the place. And I don't want to lose that. So this is an opportunity now. True has become, over the past 2.5 years, global. We've become global. Kate Camerata is sort of nodding her head and going, I told you so, I told you so. Just to confirm the fact that she was the person that 5 years ago was saying, go virtual with everything and you'll become global. And I was going, we're a little not-for-profit arts services organization. How are we going to be global? Well, Zoom was the answer, apparently. Um, so we've been doing this, and we've been talking about all sorts of things over the past 2.5 years, and now we're broadening our perspective beyond just what it's like to be in isolation, because a lot of us are going out now, although COVID is still there. Everybody, COVID is still with us, but hopefully all of us are vaccinated, and hopefully all of us are wearing masks when we need to, and we're being safe. Um, Today I'm moving into an area that I know nothing about. TV is, I mean, I watch TV. I have Roku. That's the extent of my knowledge of television. Um, I I kind of can see where there are differences in how people write for TV versus how I write for theater or how we write for theater. Um, Tracy Swedlow, who is part of our community, happens to be very much ingrained in the television world, and she had this idea that we should do something about how to adapt to a different medium. I mean, we've actually how to adapt to Zoom and virtual presentation. We've done several things about that, but we've never specifically directly um, looked at television as an option for some of us, someplace where we might want to actually explore and find opportunities. I'm going to bring my guests in now because I've said more than enough. And I want you to meet them. Um Tracy Swedlow, say a quick hi to us and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, just like a couple sentences. Oh, and I would suggest that my guests take themselves off mute.
All right.
It's always helpful.
I'm a very proud member of True. I'm excited to be I did foundations. I'm going to be doing masters. So I'm part of this community as well. And but this other universe that I live in is one that studies what's called the multi-platform television ecosystem or the community. And these are all the people who produce television, who drive distribution, tracking and measurement and advertising, who provide the software, who provide who make all the decisions about what business to go into
Well,
what alliances to make.
you're going way farther than I
Sorry,
needed you
I'm
to
too
right
more
now.
than two sentences.
Because I want to go back
Yes.
specifically to multi-platform television. I want to
Yes.
actually have everybody understand what that means. Hopefully they'll understand it better than I do. So we're gonna go there, and we're gonna go to other things that you've already mentioned in passing. Jason, I've never met you before, so welcome to True. It's good to meet you. Thank you for being with us. I know that you are the founder of the Creators Writing Room, and tell us a little bit about what that is and what you know that we don't know.
Lovely to meet you, Bob. You got this thing down to a science, dude. You're muting people. You got people going off camera. Like this is a whole production in itself. I dig it.
Thank you.
Very quickly, CWR is a platform for up and coming writers and creators, and we try to give away as much information as possible and do some classes here and there. And me personally, I will keep it very simple. I work in TV development. I'm happy to explain later on what that even means. I'm still figuring it out.
Okay. Well, that was quick. Now, I want you to get. I'm getting to Brian Seth Hurst, who I was like buddies with like 32 years ago.
You're not the only person from 37, 40 years ago that's come back into my life in the last year.
Yeah, we were children together, though, just to make that
Indeed.
clear. Yeah, we were kids together. Brian, actually, I know Brian through one of the co-founders of Theater Resources Unlimited. Allison Brewster, you never hear the name Allison Brewster because she helped us create this whole idea of a place where producers could come and meet and help each other and learn more about the business. And then she kind of went in a different direction, and she never asked me to give her credit. So I guess I could.
Well, she's now Allison Brewster Francetti. Ooh,
She's
and
Francetti,
Dr.
and she's a
Dr.
classical
Allison
pianist, and
Brewster
she's a very talented classical pianist, and I might have her as a guest one of these days. So, Brian, what have you been up to for 32 years?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I'm really honored and inspired to be here. My roots were in theater, so I'm the chief storyteller at StoryTech Immersive. I kind of fled television to get into immersive media. When I first put a headset on my head, every writer wants people to be able to immerse themselves in the story world that they create. And I got the chills when I first saw virtual reality. And so I transitioned into VR.
You're dangling a carrot that we're not going to let them munch on.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about VR today.
No, but I actually grew up in television. My father was on air. My mother was a producer. I ended up as vice chair of the Emmy Awards and chair of the Producers Guild New Media Council. And as Tracy can tell you, whenever there's a cutting edge technology, I'm an entertainment technologist after being a storyteller. So I sit at that intersection. So
I'm going to have you define those terms.
Oh,
All
fine.
of these terms
Anyway,
are going to get defined.
Anyway, my storytelling is my love, regardless of the medium. So I have learned to adapt. I wrote A Pigtail, it was a best-selling kids book with Olivia Newton-John, and the book Whole, which is a spiritual book, and became an author's coach after that. So writing and storytelling, it's how we know who we are, how we know where we've come from, and how we know what we will be. And that's why I love storytelling.
It's interesting. This is almost like a segue from last week, because last week we had Kaya Little Turtle, who is a Native American storyteller, or he comes from a family of storytellers. His grandmother was a storyteller. So I'm wondering whether, I assume that the term means the same thing wherever it's applied. These are just people who basically propagate important information that we need to know about ourselves and where we come from by putting it into stories and helping people understand how we got here.
It also allows people, the most successful stories are stories that people can identify themselves within. So that's why I'm so glad for diversity and inclusion, because now everyone can see themselves in story.
Right. So storytelling is a very specific thing. I want to get back to that, but I want to go back to Tracy for a moment. Tell us why television is a multi-platform medium. What does that mean?
But before I answer that, I just wanted to point out that both of these gentlemen are really excellent at the pitching process and understand that situation, which is why I invited them. Brian, also multi-platform understands that universe. But why is television multi-platform? Well, when digital technology was enabled through, to become HD TV, they realized they could send data eventually through the internet, right? And so what's happened is that every single digitally enabled device can accept video. And they eventually realized, as technology improved, that they could, deliver programming. So I would say that VR is a type of television. It's screened entertainment. That's sort of another term that people use. But multi-platform television exists now on your phone. It exists on, through cable, satellite, streaming devices, everywhere. But the thing that's exciting and frightening is how the industry is moving so quickly to try to get rid of the middleman, middle person,
yes,
middle person, so they can deliver content directly to you through other means, bypassing cable, bypassing the satellite people, bypassing other entities that are sucking a lot of money out of their coffers. So for example, there's a new platform that has emerged called Next Gen TV, which is based on something called ATSC 3.0 technology, which is mandated by the government. And ATSC stands for Advanced Television Systems Committee. And this will allow the broadcasters to deliver content directly to the television. If you have a tuner inside your TV, or if you have an external antenna, remember antennas? And this will allow the broadcasters to deliver all kinds of new content. So the inventory for content is exploding. This technology is being delivered right now to cities all around the country, and they will be bypassing the cable industry to some extent and satellite. If you have an internet back channel, you'll be able to get very high quality television like the Academy Awards or the Tony Awards, and they can be interactive now. So all that local TV news content that you've been getting, any of those local networks you've been watching, if you're still watching, the Twilight Zone on regular late night TV, all of that stuff, right, will be delivered directly to your television from the broadcasters, and it will be interactive. And they're also going to deliver advertising to you too. That will be interactive. So that's a whole new platform.
So I'm going to my plan is to go from the definitions of television and the multi-platform television into content. But before we move next step to content, and after content, I want to talk about how skills in theater can be adapted to the medium that we're talking about today. So does anybody want to add anything about multi-platform and what the world is like in TV right now?
I think it is the opportunity. So part of what Tracy is referring to, the next step is literally the democratization of media. And I don't want to get into a long discussion about what's coming in the metaverse. I suggest you get the book Metaverse by Matthew Ball. But the idea that creators can now go direct through a platform like a metaverse platform, and the idea that you would be able to sell direct to your audience in the form of NFTs, the idea that you create something and then they sell it to somebody else and you still make royalties. The whole content industry is becoming decentralized. And that idea of decentralization, that's part of what Tracy's talking about. So big cable is being disintermediated by direct relationships. You have Meta, which is Facebook, that's centralized. They own all your data. They own all your content that you post. In decentralized, quote unquote, metaverse virtual world land, you own your data. You own what you create. You price what you create. So for playwrights, even if you decided not to transition to television, but you decided to film and distribute your play and charge for that, these are new opportunities that technology is bringing. This is what excites me about being an entertainment technologist and also being part of a startup that is devoted to this, because finally, we as writers and artists, we are able to build directly. So you do have to be a business person and an entrepreneur besides a writer, but it's happening in the music industry and it's happening in the art industry. And now there's no reason why it can't happen in the content industry. As a matter of fact, just a little plug here first for Tracy's conference, Television of Tomorrow. We're actually doing a panel on entertainment in the metaverse. So the great thing is this is like a new golden age to me of content and opportunities for writers.
So this is basically setting the scene. My goal here is for us to establish what the world is that we're inviting people to consider going into. Jason, did you want to add anything else about multi-platform and the business itself?
I wouldn't consider myself fairly qualified to speak on multi-platform. I mean, what I can say just from the studio, having come from the studio side, is that, you know, studio and network and streamers, we've reached the peak of, let's say, apps that we have to download in order to get our content. Referring to Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, we're going to be seeing more of those being condensed because of exactly what Brian and Tracy are talking about. So I say that just to say there's a number of different ways to get your content, to get your shows, to get your stories out into the world.
So the practical question.
I want to add though that I would say that even though they're in the industry, there's a massive amount of consolidation. Like Warner Brothers Discovery, of course, just combined. But there are going to be more apps coming. Believe me, we see that every day. So it's not peaked. I don't think it's peaked yet.
So
referring to the traditional studio network model,
yes,
though, Tracy,
okay.
not that we won't see more apps delivering content, but in terms of the traditional model that we've seen so far.
So let's talk about the traditional model versus where we are now, and how does that affect content? How does that affect the way you write or think for TV? We'll get to pitching next, because I know that's one of the reasons why Tracy wanted you to be here, because you know the industry and you know how people need to talk about their work in order to be heard and taken seriously. But let's start with the assumption that people in this room write for theater. What do they need to know about the multi-platform or just television in general? How do they move into that area as writers?
Well, if I may, the first thing I would do is I'd get my hands on as many television scripts as possible. It's like, what do you want to write for? Do you want to write sitcom? Do you want to write 1 hour drama? Do you want to write limited 6-episode series? And I would study that, because the technique for, it's funny, I had written a play years ago and I thought it would be a great movie. And Bruce Cohen, who was at the Producers Guild, same time I was an officer of the Producers Guild, said, it's been my experience that the medium you write for is the first medium it should be produced in. And I took that to heart and I thought to myself, it's because you've written something as a play, not adapted, but you've written something as a play, that you've seen that completely in front of you. Setting the scene, understanding screenwriting, and the lines, I think, and either Tracy or Jason can correct me, but the lines between television content and film content are being blurred. And so it's more about the format that you're writing in, sitcom, or, I think What We Do in the Shadows is like one of the greatest television shows right now, because it's so brilliantly written, it's so brilliantly thought out. But you are writing for a different visual medium. You are not writing for audience response or audience laughs. The theater is very much interactive between the audience and the people on stage. And my experience, and I could definitely say that I trained under Tim Kring, who I consider to be, as a producer on one of his projects, who I can consider to be the greatest mentor I've ever had in my life. And to be able to break a story in a writer's room, and there's a whole different way to write for television, but the same thing applies. Good story, great characters, great story arc. If you're dealing with tropes, for like if you're writing zombie stuff, you can break those tropes, but you have to acknowledge they exist before you break them.
Well, let me ask you a silly question.
Are no silly questions.
If you are, thank you. If you are new to this and you're coming from theater and you're just thinking, oh, I want to try TV. Is there a form that is more likely to be taken seriously? I mean, you're not going to come up with 24 episode huge miniseries necessarily. I mean, that's because that's going to be a lot of money in terms of production.
So Bob, I have watched shows literally break on YouTube and then become series. So low production values on YouTube, but great characters, great stories. And then later, suddenly you see them on Netflix. And I don't know how much money Netflix is spending on anything these days, but suddenly you see them on Netflix or you see them on Hulu. And it just is like, if you're a great writer, I think you can adapt. I think you just have to, like anything else, when you wanted to be a playwright or you wanted to write musicals, I am sure that everyone that does that basically immerse themselves in the medium to learn as much as they could.
But it's true. We talk a lot about the practical aspects of theater, of creating a niche for yourself in theater, and we let everybody know that they can write absolutely anything they want to. It's just that some things are more producible than others, and it's very hard for a new writer who doesn't have any credits to get a huge 30 cast musical with 17 sets produced. How do you write for TV? How does any of that matter in TV? Do you just jump in and do it, or do you think in terms of?
I'm going to defer to Jason.
Jason, okay,
well,
I'm happy to hear.
First of all, I love what Brian was saying. I mean, I co-sign all of it. And just to give an example of that is there's a show, Broad City, which started out as a web series on YouTube, which eventually became a Comedy Central show, half-hour sitcom, which then one of the women became a showrunner of A League of Their Own, a show that's premiering right now. So to follow that trajectory of, it really comes down to a strategy and thinking about it, which was said before. I think Brian said it of the business side of things. And we are creators, we want to write and we create, and that not always do we use that brain, but thinking about the purpose of a studio. What are they? They're a company. What's their purpose? To make money. So we kind of have to think about ways that we can tell our stories that are suitable for that model. But now, Bob, to your question, I think it comes down to, and I'll bring this word back, strategy. There's really two things that writers are going to be doing in television. And this is really important when we ask ourselves, well, if I want to be a TV writer or pivot into television, do I want to be a staff writer? Do I want to staff on someone else's show? Or do I want to write and pitch and create and develop my own show and take that out and pitch it? Those are two separate things. Okay. So I think having a clear understanding of what those two things are and which one you would like to pursue is really important.
Okay, well,
Bob, I just want to add to that. So Matt and Ross Duffer, who created Stranger Things, limited, as the myth goes, limited experience in television. And so they get paired, because it was a great concept, they get paired with experienced showrunners. And now, I mean, they're on.
Okay, define showrunner for everybody.
Okay, so a showrunner is literally the person that's the executive producer, maintains the vision of the show, hires the writers, runs the writer's room, makes the creative decisions, interfaces with the network or the studio or both, and basically, quote unquote, runs the show. Their decision is final. In the old days, it's like now the Duffer brothers are showrunners, but in the old days, you worked your way up. First, you were a writer's assistant and you ran and got everybody coffee. Then if you were lucky, you moved up the next level. You were a writer, then you got a staff writing position. A lot of people wrote spec scripts just to get a job as a writer's assistant. But now when you talk to veteran producers like Tim, that game has changed fundamentally. So it's kind of like the gatekeepers aren't sitting where they used to sit. Maybe Jason can speak more to this, but there's opportunities for things to bubble up that I don't think there were before, if I'm making any sense. But so you can have limited experience and pitch something. I have to think so much of the world runs on passionate. I'm an investor as well. And when someone comes and they pitch to me investment wise, the first thing I look for is passion. Because they have to believe in their project more than anybody else.
And we always talk about that in theater as well. I think Jason, Brian threw the ball to you.
To piggyback on the showrunner concept, yes, to everything Brian is saying. And in development, one of the things that we ask as a studio, or one of the things that the network will ask, is who's going to run this show? Because yes, we can be excellent writers and we can create. At the end of the day, networks and studios want to mitigate risk as much as possible. So by doing that, it's bringing on an experienced executive producer or showrunner. Now, how does that help us? Well, if we have a friend who's a showrunner, that's great. We can go to them and say, will you read my stuff? I want to get staffed on your show. Another way it helps us is, again, I'll go back to that word strategy and thinking about it from the business side. One thing that is very attractive to studios and networks is what we call a package. And part of that package refers to who's the writer, who wrote this script, who are they partnering with to produce this show. So a friend of mine, Lee Aronson, who I started CWR with, produced Big Bang Theory. He was the showrunner for 2.5 Men and wrote on a billion other shows. If I'm a new writer, and if I want to take this to Lee and say, hey, I would love to partner with you and have you like help produce this, great. Now we're developing a package. If it's based on intellectual property, I want to reach out to the author and say, or the playwright, and say, hey, I'd love to turn this into the show. You get their blessing. Then you start the search for a showrunner. If you get them on board, you start to develop this package of people that now give you more credibility as a project.
I think people also, though, and I'm adding a question for you, Bob, but I think everybody here would love to figure out, how do you get to the showrunner? Don't you need an agent? I mean, what are the barriers involved? How should people cross those barriers?
I like that.
So sadly, still, the agents and managers tend to be the gatekeepers and the people putting the pieces together and introducing you and getting you these meetings. So how do we get an agent or manager if that's the case? And by the way, that's not always the case. Like I did a Q&A with a writer last night who got a staff writing position purely because of relationships and then wound up getting a manager, right? So it's always a catch-22 chicken or the egg, because in order to get an agent or a manager, what do you need to do? You need to have a staff writing credit. How do you get a staff writing credit? You need to get an agent or a manager. So let's back up.
We play that game in theater a lot too.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you attract an agent and a manager? If you want to write, it comes down to the writing. And we staff a lot of people or get sent writing samples from agents and managers that aren't just TV pilots, but they're plays. Writing plays, being a playwright, is a tremendous advantage in television because budgets are a lot smaller and they want to see that you can create something intense, dramatic, heart-pumping, comedic, just with two people in a room with minimal things around it. So being a playwright is an advantage. What we want to do is take that writing and take one of our best samples and use that to try to get access to an agent or a manager through our relationships or through sending them out cold or putting on one of our own shows and inviting a bunch of people to come out and see it.
Well, we've had conversations about film, and one thing that always comes up is treatments. Rather than submitting finished products, a lot of times in the film world, I'm told people do treatments and pitch their treatment rather than the finished script. Is that true at all in TV, or do you just do the scripts now?
Brian?
I was going to say so many things have changed. First of all, my nephew won the final draft writing contest, got a manager, got a staff position, got an agent. And everybody that entered that contest, there's also, I read, Jason, there's also Catalyst, which is there. Mm-hmm. So Catalyst is a story institute. They have a conference in Duluth. You enter your material there. I don't know what's happening.
Are you going to be there, Brian? I'm going to be out there.
I was at the early one.
Philip Gilpin is potentially speaking at the conference, Brian, in October.
I haven't seen him in a while. But here's the thing.
From Catalyst, yeah.
It's so I don't know that Warner Brothers still does it, but they had a writer's workshop. ABC Television had a writer's workshop. And if you're part of a diverse group, there are writing opportunities for you in terms of these workshops. It's like ABC has a casting workshop. They've turned people into stars. So to write, to continue to apply, that's the one thing. The other thing is I just go back to, like, great. You know what? Take your story to a film school get the film students to work with you, do a student film, because that at least shows what you've got. And if you can see, I can see the essence even through bad production values of something. So there are a million ways in. There is the institutionalized way that television is in, has always been, and that system still kind of exists, but nobody's really watching that kind of television anymore. And so I just think there are a million ways in. But Bob, when you say, well, how do you get an agent? That whole catch-22.
No, that wasn't what I said.
Oh, sorry.
I wasn't talking
about
an
the
agent.
treatment versus writing the whole.
Yeah, I wanted to find out whether treatments exist in the TV world, because we hear that all the time. We hear that for new writers, you're more likely to have an inroad into the film world with a treatment than with a finished. And
I'm not so sure. I don't think there's any one way. I think if you have a reputation, I have watched people pitch TV shows. I used to be a pitch coach for NAPI. That's another place you can go. NAPI has a workshop for writers. You can pitch your stuff. They have a pitch-a-thon. I used to be a pitch coach for NAPI. I've watched people's stuff acquired in
if we're going to find their way to that, can you spell it for us?
NATPE, National Association of Television Programming Executives.
Okay.
But I've watched people pitch something in a room and have it picked up in 3 minutes, where the network says, you know what? We're going to talk to you about this. But if you get the Hollywood no, which is really nice, that's really great. Thank you for coming in. That's how Hollywood.
Let us think about it. We'll get back to you. We know what that means.
That's a no.
I think it's important to understand, just like you guys teach here at True, know the theater you're pitching to. You have to know the studio, and you have to know what they're looking for, and you have to understand the complex sort of situation where there's so much conglomeration, and which studio owns which networks. I mean, that's something that I study all day, every day, and there are various maps out there, and I could show you those another time if you want. But the other thing is that, Jason, you mentioned in the interview I did with you on my podcast called Television Nation, you talked about network mandates. And I actually found a list of network mandates for 2020 through 2021. So that's another thing that writers need to really look at. And they need to look at what networks are looking for, what kind of content they're looking for.
So you're saying that the network mandates, the phrase that you use, network mandates, this has to do with what they put out something that says what they're looking for. Yeah,
you kind of have to dig for it. And I found one, but Jason, you might want to speak more to that.
I mean, they're not, okay, here's the thing, gang. I will give you the inside scoop on this, and sometimes they're made public, sometimes not. I mean, generally everything always gets made public at the end of the day. So yes, like you can Google for one and see them. What we would do, and what I would do personally would be to go around to different networks like Netflix and Hulu and all of them and say, hey, what is it you guys are looking for this season? What do you want in the half-hour space? What do you want in the hour-long space? And here's generally what we got.
Who would we have access to that we could ask that question to?
Who would we have? I'm not sure I understand, Bob. I'm sorry.
Well, we can't pick up a phone and talk to any.
Oh no, I understand. But here's what I'm getting at is that generally the gist of mandates would be, yeah, we're looking for like family dramas, also something that's like gritty hour long, also something that is more YA, and for half hour we're looking for sitcoms. And then also like half hour family friendly, but also something YA. So the mandates can be any number of things, and they change quite a bit. If we're chasing them, we're probably getting a little bit further away from telling our true, authentic stories, which is what's most important. So I agree with Tracy in terms of we just need to be knowledgeable and try to have an understanding of what people might be looking for. But I've spoken to so many up and coming writers who would make a decision of a pilot they want to write or pitch based on, I'll give an example, the limited series Queen's Gambit, which was a big hit a couple years ago on Netflix. And all of a sudden it would be, well, I want to write a limited series that's a period piece, but instead of chess, it's about checkers because Queen's Gambit was a hit. That's the absolute wrong way to be thinking about it. What we want are true, authentic voices that come from the heart. Because really, at the end of the day, we're looking for unique, distinct voices. And what I mean by that are things and concepts that are original and haven't been heard before. And more often than not, that's going to be from all of you who's on the Zoom right now. So I just want to be very clear on that. Also, when it comes to treatments versus writing a script, newer writers have to have writing samples. Like, there's just no way around it. You're not going to get staff. You're not going to get anyone's attention without a strong play or without a strong pilot within the medium that you want to write for.
So you could use a play as a writing sample.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean,
Okay.
It could be a feature film. Whatever best showcases your writing and your voice, in order to try to get staffed, in order to try to get repped, you want to make sure you have a strong writing sample. Now, going into the room to pitch a show, that's completely different. A pitch is going to be different than your actual writing sample.
Can you describe I'm sorry, Bob, I'm
I
asking
was
a
going to
question.
go before we go to the pitch, because I'm still not getting clarity about something that's in my head, and that may be something that's wrong with my head. But
Bob, let's get your head clear. Let's get your head
okay.
very clear right now.
So, what are the most prevalent markets right now? This can be anecdotal. You don't have to have the definitive answer to it, but just to give us a sense of what the world is like. What are the stories that they want to have told? You're saying authentic stories, of course. Yeah, we all know that. But what does that mean? I mean, does it mean a one-off? Does it mean a TV film? Does it mean a series? Does it mean a limited series? There's so many choices.
I would check the all of the above box, though, Bob. It's the all of the. It's so really. When I talk about that package and who you're pitching with, I'm curious. I want to hear from Brian on this, but from my perspective, from my vantage point, it's more. You flesh that out with all of the partners and the producers and that package of people that I was talking about. You flesh that out. Once people like the pitch and the concept and the characters and the hook of the show, you're able to flesh all of that out. Now, if you come in with a strong point of view and say, I know this is a limited series, or I know this is a sitcom, or I know it's an hour-long drama, that's great. But you flesh all of those things out. But I'm curious to hear Brian's take.
I put a link in the chat. It took 30 years for Queen's Gambit to be made. So,
and there's a book written, I think, in the 1960s that it was based on, right?
Article is very interesting. You know, I'm more of
Brian, I'm not sure whether it didn't make it into the chat. You may have done it as a private to someone.
Yeah, it's the title of the article is The Queen's Gambit Holds Vital Lessons.
There it is. No, I see it.
For all of us in the power of not giving up. So just as an example, so first of all, if you've got a story to tell, you get to decide what the best medium is for telling it in. I know the networks have their mandates. If it happens to be that the story that I want to tell matches the network mandate, that's great. So I'll just give you an example. I had an idea for a story. I wanted to do it. I want to do it with Tim. Tim Kring. We've been talking about doing it. As I'm talking to Tim, we're talking about how best to tell this story. Is it a feature?
Wait, Brian, they don't know who Tim Kring is. Tell them who.
He mentioned him earlier, but yeah, you can remind us.
Tim Kring is experienced showrunner.
And he's the greatest mentor you've ever had.
Yes. He created Heroes. He created Dig. He created Touch. He was early on Misfits of Science. Just a really great storyteller. And so while we're talking about it and balancing, and this is what was so great, because I had an idea with the story in my head. And Tim, I knew that he would be able to add twists that would make it greater. But in the end, he said, you know what? I think we can tell this story and make it really work in a limited series, 6 episodes. And once he said that was the format, and I started thinking that way, I realized he was completely right. And I mean, I was really fortunate to meet him because, long story short, a woman that I was working with, there's another media exchange, MEDIA, the letter X, CHANGE. You want to learn how to write for television? There's whole programs, interviews with showrunners. They are global. And I was the guy who went to speak on new media. And Tim came up to me and said, I have been watching your career. for the last 3 years, I want to talk to you on and work with you. That's how I ended up doing Conspiracy for Good, which was a kind of alternate reality game, something else we won't get into, but you can look it up online. And so the idea of what is it going to take to tell your story? What is the best medium? You are the storyteller. So yeah, you may want television, but you may decide that the best way to tell your story is a novel, or the best way to tell your story is a play. So when you're looking, Bob, should this be a limited series? Could it be like Shonda Rhimes, another person you can learn from, study her history? She had a 5-year arc. Little did she know it would go for 20 years for Grey's Anatomy. So she knew where those characters were going to go, how they were going to develop over a 5-year arc. She was totally in developing this as a television series. So I don't know that there's any right answer. I wish I could be more helpful, but
Well, I think
Jason, there's a cautionary word there, which is don't give up your authenticity to fit into a box.
Brian, it's not just that I'm expecting you to give us the definitive answers to any of this, but the conversation brings.
I am looking to Brian for the definitive answers. Okay, I need them from Brian. This is why I'm on here.
But at least what we're hearing about a lot of the options, so that people can start thinking in different ways. I think what I want people to get out of today is just understanding how to think about a different medium. Because I think a lot of us are pretty inured in theater, and I know theater backwards and forwards. I don't really know. I don't know where to start when I'm going into TV or even film, other than overcoming my fear. That probably would be a good place to start.
I would also add, Bob, that the one thing that working in the television industry will change about storytelling, and is changing, is that it's going to enable a lot of tracking and measurement about how people watch your show. You can also make it interactive, so then you can have a direct relationship with the viewers. There's interactivity is going to change the game completely.
Tracy, and sorry to Bob to play your role here, because I was talking about this with someone recently. Are there any current examples of the interactive aspect? I know there was like a Black Mirror season that came out that was like interactive with your remote, but I'm curious because I would love to look into them, because I agree. I think that's where it's headed, more of the engagement and being interactive.
Thanks for asking. I actually did an interview with this guy who's in charge of interactive strategy at Netflix. So if you want to watch the full interview on my Television Nation podcast, you can.
Do you want to put the link in for us at some point?
Okay. I didn't really necessarily feel like I had to promote my thing, but it is instructive, I think, that particular interview. So I'm just putting up the link to the podcast itself.
But here's the reason why. Go ahead, Trace.
I just think I interviewed this guy, and they have a whole suite of projects that are interactive. If you go on Netflix online, or on the CTV, the connected TV version app, and you search on the word interactive, all the shows that are interactive will come up. They've got more than what was on Black Mirror, which was Bandersnatch, and then actually won all kinds of awards. They have interactive. What's that game that the kids love with the blocks? I can't remember.
Roblox.
No, the other one.
Legos?
No. Anyway, they've got a whole bunch of interactive shows there. They've got dramas and choose your own adventure ones. They've got like natural wildlife kinds of things where you can decide where Bear Grylls is going next, or whether he should survive this or the. They're doing a lot of experimentation with interactivity.
And the reason why I just bring that up, gang, real quick, sorry, Bob, is just because that's what we want to be thinking about. The next thing. What's the next thing? What's the next story? I'll go back to the Queen's Gambit reference. Queen's Gambit was already done, right? So what's the next thing? Because we can always go by mandates, but trust me on this, TV networks do not know what they want until they hear it.
So I just added a link in, Bob, of a talk that I did at the Future of Storytelling about the levels, the participation continuum, because the audience can participate at different levels. And so I'm not going to go into that, but I put the link in the chat. And, because some writers want to control the whole story world. They don't want to be interactive. Some people want to hand the story world over to the community and have them write fan fiction. So there are different levels of that.
If you look at it from a theater writer's point of view, somebody who's been trained in dramaturgy, and somebody who understands structure, and the structure for TV and film, well, TV particularly, film actually has a three-part structure. Film classically does follow a lot of the dramaturgical principles of theater writing, but for TV, once you go beyond the film, the TV film, the one-timer, and you're into the 5-year Chandra Rhimes arc, how do we apply the principles of dramaturgy to that? How do we know what's good writing?
Bob, it's every episode, whether it's a sitcom or whether it's an hour drama, every episode has act breaks. They are written as acts. Some have 3 acts, some have 5 acts.
I just wanted to hear it said.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Again, the best thing, just an anecdotal story. One of the reasons I wanted to be a television writer, which I have never really been, I've been a writer, but sort of in support side as a consulting producer, was because of an episode of Dick Van Dyke where it's called The Curious Thing About Women, where they're coming up with the sketch and they're breaking it in the writer's room, and how utterly exciting that was. And so what did I do? I watched more television to kind of figure it out. I studied I Love Lucy. I studied Dick Van Dyke. And then when it came to current television, I went, there are scripts online. I got my hands on as many scripts as possible to read them, to understand beats, to understand acts, to understand character arcs. So I think the best thing to do is study the medium. If you're a good writer and you know how to tell a story, you're going to be able to adapt to a different medium.
Well, rather than I try to intuit the questions that everybody has, I'd like to invite our members here, our community, to actually ask questions. Virtual hand raise is really the easiest thing for us, because I'll be able to see that you want to ask something. You can put something into the chat as well, which is harder for me. Yeah, Greg Nekrasovas, what's your question?
First off, thank you for this really great conversation. I'm just kind of curious, what genres do you feel are kind of in right now? Whether it be TV, streaming, dramas, reality, sci-fi. I'm just asking out of curiosity.
You're going to get the same answer I got to the question.
I would
all
say
of the above.
Edgy. All the above. Yeah. The only thing I would say in the comedy space, broadcast sitcom comedy, it is kind of a dying breed. Not to say we'll never see them anymore. And what I mean by broadcast multicam sitcom comedy are shows like 2.5 Men, Big Bang Theory, Seinfeld, Friends. If we think about the king of broadcast multi-sitcom comedies is Chuck Lorre, who's pivoted into Young Sheldon and the show he had on Netflix. So single cam comedies. And by single camera, they're shot with one camera and they're shot as if they're a film. They're still funny, they're still comedic, but they're shot in a completely different way with no live audience. So not to say they're completely dead, but just one thing to think about.
I would also say that I've noticed, it's just a notice of a trend, and I think Hacks really speaks to it if you haven't seen it, which is the development of the characters. They are changing over time. Same thing with what we do in the shadows. They are changing slowly over time. They are growing over time. It's accelerated.
We're talking about 2,000 years in this case.
Yeah, that's true. But, if you watch Hacks, you watch the characters, it's very smart. It's very well written. But you watch these characters presented with opportunities to grow or die, literally. Mm-hmm. And so they're forced into situations where they grow. It's wonderful to watch.
Yeah, what Brian's referring to is serialized storytelling versus episodic. Yes. So Seinfeld is a very episodic show where you could tune in season 6, episode 12, and it's just the story of that episode, as opposed to the character having an arc over the course of the pilot, the season, and the series. So a lot of single cam comedies and, hour-long dramas are exactly like that. They're serialized storytelling.
Thank you for that. I appreciate I appreciate giving it a name.
Thank you.
I knew it was there. I just couldn't name it. Andrea, you have a question.
Hi. Yeah, I'm interested in breaking into TV or film as a director. I was wondering if there was any time just to speak to that quickly.
Yeah, get a good script, whether you write it or somebody else does, and get a great crew together and cast it and actually shoot it and put it out into the world. Put it into festivals. It could be a short film. It could be episode 1 of a web series. It could be a full-length pilot. It's totally up to you. Generally, these things are done, like Brian had called attention to earlier, around a particular budget, a lower budget than what TV would be, but really put together that proof of concept, and do it with something you're really passionate and excited about. I'd maybe start in theater. I'm not sure if you have any directing experience in theater, but kind of start like, what is that first step? And then have the ultimate goal. If the ultimate goal is to direct the Avengers, great, I love it. How do we get from directing that first play to directing the Avengers, and what are the steps in between?
I want to point out to everybody that if it weren't for Brian Seth Hurst's work, he created the interactive media peer group within the Emmy.
Well, I was one of many.
Okay, well, you were there, and I was there at the first party. But the point is that because of the interactive media peer group, or IMPG, now web series, things on YouTube, things that are in the metaverse, any kind of digital media can be considered for an Emmy Award. Before that, it was only traditional linear TV. Even streaming was part of that, I think, right?
So I'm gonna go to the chat for a second to pull out a couple things. Michael Dicatano points out that Seinfeld brilliantly brought back character line situations from episodes from years earlier. I will say, based on my understanding of what Jason's talking about, serialized is a little different than that, because the episodes the episodes need to be seen in sequence on hacks, so that you understand and you see the steps of the development of these characters and their dynamic.
You have to see where their journey started.
Yeah, you really need to follow it from beginning to end. He's right that you could tune into Seinfeld at any old season, any old episode, and pretty much understand what's going on. I don't think you would understand as much about hacks if you jumped in on episode 3 or 4. What about Schitt's Creek? Would you call that serialized, or?
I would. I mean, it's brilliantly serialized, because they stretched out the arcs so far, as opposed to Breaking Bad, which is an hour-long drama where you have to have an arc happen pretty quickly in that pilot, a big catalyst for change. Schitt's Creek has it, where it's a riches to rags story, and it happens right during the cold open, which is before the title card even hits. But the characters are pretty much the same consistently throughout, except these tiny little incremental changes. And so that's why I love the show, because they do such a good job in, our characters are very different from when we get to them at the finale, but it's done so subtly and not so quickly as a dramatized show would be. A dramatic show.
Just so you know, I almost stopped watching Schitt's Creek. I couldn't get it from the first 3 episodes. But once I hooked into what they were doing, I just loved the show. Yeah, I'm glad that I stayed with it. I really was ready to leave after episode 3, but it kept me. So many things in here. Clay points out Abbott Elementary, single camp at Still Network, nominated for 3 Emmys. Can you speak to that? Is there still space for network opportunities? Okay, that was 2 different questions. Abbott Elementary is real quick. Abbott Elementary is about relationships. Each one of its episodes, I think, has its own arc. I'm not sure whether it's as dependent on the serialization as.
Okay, wait. Sorry, Bob. This is so important, and I know we didn't get a chance really to touch on pitching, which I know Brian is really good at too. But you hit on a very, very important word that we absolutely have to hear in a pitch, which is that word relationships and the relationship dynamics. Now, there are a number of things. We want to hear your emotional connection and the characters, but as you're describing the characters, really shows come down to the character and relationship dynamics. And very quickly, I'll explain with an example of one of my favorite shows, Mad Men, where you have Don Draper who wants and needs something. Then you have his wife who wants and needs something. It comes up in conflict with Don. That's a relationship dynamic. Don's boss wants something from Don. It comes in contrast with what Don wants. That is creating a relationship dynamic. It's creating tension and drama. That's what's going to make us watch the show episode after episode. So in pitching, and again, I know we're just briefly touching on it, that's something that's really important when you're pitching the show to think about when you're describing your characters.
John Loftus wants to know, are the US and British formats the same? Are there differences between the British market and the American market, to the best of your knowledge? Again, I'm not asking for definitive.
So
No.
I can answer that because I got to go to the Berlin Drama Series lab for like 6 years in a row. The way the shows are put together and commissioned is entirely different, but the lines are becoming blurred ever since things like Downton Abbey came aboard. So now, and the difference between that is, and other things, is that Julian Fellows is, this is the artiste model, where there is a single person that is responsible for the overall direction and writing of the show. But more and more, example, Frank Spotnitz, who used to write on X-Files, moved to the UK and is produced The Man in the High Castle. And what he's doing is he's now bringing the American model of the showrunner and the writer's room over to Europe. And so that seems in Europeans, thanks to the work of Media Exchange, the Europeans are getting more into the American model, especially Scandinavia. The Scandi noir dramas, they're all based on American show models. And so what you see is our writer's room efficiencies now being translated. So back to the original question, the BBC, they were the ones that came up with the 6-episode series. That was their format. Now it's more becoming our format because it can work on streaming services. Doesn't have the demand of the network for second, third season and all of that. It can be a limited series and a limited season. So yeah, more and more. And because there's two things happening. There's the globalization of television, which is the ability to import and export formats from one to the other, where a format is done in one language and then it's produced in the other. And then there is the localization of content. So a lot of Americans, former showrunners that were big in America, have moved to Europe and are working in Germany and working in France and working in the UK.
Are any other questions from the room? Did I miss anything? Let's see. I didn't ask the second part of Clay's question. Is there still opportunity for network? It's still space for network opportunities. Can you describe the network model versus what else is going on now?
So in our language at the studio level, network for us means a buyer, essentially. So when we say the word broadcast, we're talking about ABC, NBC, Fox, CBS. When we talk about cable, we're talking about AMC, FX, channels like that, Discovery, whatever it is. If we're talking about premium, we're talking about HBO, Showtime, Stars, those types of channels. And we're talking about streaming, obviously, we're talking about Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. So a network for us is typically all of those things, although I know that sometimes we hear the word network and we think CBS or ABC. So on that front, they just mean different things. I think broadcast is really, really challenging, just because their traditional model of quote unquote making money has come upside down with streamers. So we're seeing just a lot more content because they're limited to the content that they could put on the air, as opposed to, which is why they're pivoting into Paramount Plus and those other things. So
I mentioned the ATSC3 Next Gen TV development, which is being deployed around the whole country, in which the broadcasters are going to be doing, direct to consumer, D2C, bypassing cable and satellite. So there's a huge amount of inventory that's being created in the cities that are being lit up today. And there's a map on Pearl TV's. Oh no, I have to provide the URL later, but you'll see all the cities that have been lit up, where you can buy a next gen TV that's enabled, and you can get that content now today. So the broadcasters are changing their business model completely.
But
Mhm.
I want to add one thing in here, Bob, about the business side. So the writers in Hollywood went on strike years ago, which gave birth to reality television. Is entirely the discussion. But what's happening now, and they went so that they could get their royalties, so that they could get their back end. And what's happening now is the writers are being trashed again because they'll be paid completely upfront for a network series. No residuals, you get the whole thing upfront. You're gambling. You don't know if your series is going to be a hit or not, but it doesn't matter because you've been paid everything. So if the series becomes a hit on Netflix, you can hope for a second season, but you've gotten everything you're going to get. You're not going to get residuals. You're not going to get royalties. And this is a big issue for writers right now in Hollywood. Whole separate discussion. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just concerned about the time because I don't know. I know that you guys were planning to be here until 6:30. Do we have time for any more questions? Or
I'm happy to stay as long as you need me.
Jason, are you okay?
I do need to jump. Unfortunately, I'm in LA, so I wish it was 6:30
I could see
was.
I could see the I need to jump expression on your face.
I'm not saying I want to. I just have a couple more hours in the workday, unfortunately. This was great. I really appreciate, Tracy asking me and Bob and Brian. It was great to meet and chat with you too, and to see everyone on here. I just want to say, we've thrown a lot of information at everyone today, which is okay. I think note-taking and absorbing it and then circling back and coming back to it is really important. Go back to the recording because there are a lot of great tidbits from you, Bob, from Brian, and from Tracy. And I'll just say this: we get so hung up on the result. I just need to get staffed on this one show and it's fine. I just need to get this one job. I just need this one play to hit. And sometimes, and I'm speaking personally, we lose sight of the story that it is we're trying to tell. We lose sight of what is most important to us, which is just bringing stories to life. And that could be in the form of telling a friend. It could be in the form of a pitch. It could be in the form of putting a show on that lasts for 12 years, whatever it is. It's more about the journey and the process as opposed to that one specific result. I had to learn that the hard way.
Well,
I'm still
thank you.
trying to learn it. But anyway, this was awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for being with us, Jason. I think
I put links to Jason's stuff in the chat. You can see it.
So basically, I'm going to say a few words of farewell to my viewers. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you, Brian, Tracy, and Jason, for sharing all this information. It's a lot. It's a lot for us to grasp. I think I know it is for me. Just the idea of actually transferring my thinking from theater to TV, I find a little daunting. But you've given me a lot of things to think about and made it seem a little bit more possible. So I appreciate that. Everybody out there in YouTube or podcast land, wherever you are, if you'd like to be part of the community and come in and be in the room and actually ask questions and be part of the conversation, we'd love to have you. Email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com, and we'll send you the link every week and come to the things that interest you. And when you don't think it's going to be useful, don't show up. But we have interesting people every week. Next week we're going to have Stephanie Weissman from the Marsh Theater in San Francisco. She specializes and she focuses on solo performance. So we're going to have a lot of conversation about solo performance and what the Marsh has done to support solo artists over the years. And I'm very happy to announce on September 9th, we have Joe Iconis, the writer of Be More Chill and other things, but Be More Chill is what most people know from him. He's going to be here and he's going to talk about how he used his songs and his YouTube bits and pieces of the show and how he used his demo songs and to basically generate excitement and interest, and how that led to his getting produced a few times already. So he's going to be an interesting guest. I'm looking forward to having him. I'm looking forward to having you all in the room as well. So we do this for free. Here comes the pitch. We do this for free, but we do have expenses, and it does cost money to run a company like Theater Resources Unlimited. So I would like you to consider giving a donation to us if you can. Everybody can attend here for pay what you can. I'm sorry, and we do want you to pay something if you can, because now that we're particularly going into live performance, our expenses are going to really skyrocket based on what they've been for 2.5 years. So whatever you can do to support us, we appreciate it. It's True Donate, trudonate.com. That's trudonate.com. That'll get you to the donation website, and give us $5, give us $50, give us whatever you can, or just come here whenever you feel like it, and don't even worry about paying. We love you. We love having you here. So that's it. Thanks everyone.